What's up, AP Psych? Welcome to your classical conditioning lecture. This one piggybacks on what I talked about in the last lecture. Obviously, most of them do. But this one's going to do a deep dive specifically into all the ins and outs of classical conditioning and into the famous experiment of Pavlov and his dog. About 50% of it is about Pavlov, and then the other 50% is some other stuff. But let's get to it because some of you have heard of Pavlov's dog before. Some of you have not, but by the end of this, we're all going to know all the ins and outs of it. You'll notice on our learning targets that there's tons of initials. That might seem a little overwhelming, but they will make sense. You have to focus on what they are, and it will come together, I promise. So here is Ivan Pavlov. He is another grandpa-looking figure, just maybe a little bit more intimidating. Um, and he was a Russian physiologist who exposed classical conditioning to the world, meaning his research kind of developed the concept of classical conditioning and then it became very, very famous. So famous, in fact, that he actually won the Nobel Prize for his research on digestion. He was actually not a psychologist. He was studying digestion, and as he was studying digestion with some dogs, he noticed that the dogs were salivating before he even brought the food into their mouths. And it was intriguing enough that he decided to run some experiments. And we're going to dive right into the most famous experiment of all. Here we go. So, what Pavlov would do is he would present some food to the dog and notice that the dog would salivate. And so he called this presenting of the food the unconditioned stimulus. So label presenting the food on your chart, that's in your notes, as the unconditioned stimulus. And remember, unconditioned means natural, not learned. Like you didn't have to learn it to then have an unconditioned response. So natural stimulus led to a natural response. It is natural that when you present food to an organism, that organism, in this case the dog, salivates. Natural stimulus, natural response. The unconditioned stimulus, the UCS, leads to the unconditioned response, the UCR. And please add the note that these were natural involuntary actions. The dog did not choose to do this. These are normal things that all organisms, animals and humans alike, do. Okay, so we did that stuff. Then he took a bell, and I'll be honest, it was actually a metronome, one of those little ticker things that goes like a little device that music teachers sometimes have that go tick, 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 tick. I'll show you a video. It'll make sense later. Anyways, he took a bell. We're just going to call it the bell. And that was a neutral stimulus. A bell was just a sound. It wasn't scary. It wasn't loud. It was just a bell. And because it was neutral, it created no response. Neutral stimulus elicits no response at first. But stay tuned because it will become the conditioned stimulus. We're going to learn, conditioned, that bell is going to trigger a reaction. So I didn't say this in the last lecture, but stimulus can, in the case of classical conditioning, can be considered like a triggering event. Not in like an emotional way, although I guess it could be, but like it's going to set off a reaction. So then Pavlov would ring that bell, like the metronome, like I said, and then he would present the food a split second later. So, like, bell food, ding food. And what would happen is the dog would salivate every single time. So, this neutral stimulus, so this bell that had no natural reaction, was paired with the unconditioned stimulus to lead to an unconditioned response. And this would happen over and over. So the neutral stimulus, this thing that has no real triggering response or triggering action, has to come before the unconditioned stimulus. So then the dog is going to eventually, here, spoiler alert, the dog's going to learn that this bell means the food is coming. So it's going to start salivating on its own. So even though the bell has no reason to cause salivation, we're going to learn, the dog is going to learn that it does. So this is called the acquisition phase. So remember, associations are also known as acquisitions. It means you're learning that these two things should cause a response. So you link that neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus over and over and over until it's conditioned, until the dog learns to condition its response to that neutral trigger. Acquisition, there it is. Okay, then finally, To see if the conditioning worked, to see if Pavlov could convince the dog or trick the dog or teach the dog to salivate to a bell, he would present only the neutral stimulus, only the bell. And if the dog responded, Pavlov considered that a success. And so, yes, the dog would salivate. So that's now a conditioned stimulus. It's not neutral anymore. The dog has been conditioned or has learned to respond to the bell with a learned response. So instead of the dog only salivating for food, that's natural, the dog has learned that the bell should trigger the food to come subliminally, cognitively, so I should salivate. I'm the dog, I'm going to salivate. The conditioned stimulus leads to the conditioned response, and the neutral stimulus became a conditioned stimulus. So pause with me for a sec. And if you didn't follow what to fill out on the chart, my next slide is going to put the whole chart together, okay? But really think about what this is. And if you don't stop to think, you're not going to get this. This can sound confusing, but if you really process it, it's not so bad. We took something, the bell, that makes no response in a dog. Dog doesn't care about this ding, ding, ding. But by saying like, ding, here's the food, and the dog starts salivating, the dog seems to understand that that bell means the food is coming. And if you think about it from your schooling, when you first hear bells as a little kid, you don't know that it means to get up and move, or to get up and go to recess, or to get up and go home. Someone had to teach you that. But when they teach it to you over and over and over, you learn that that bell means you should respond in a certain way. So condition, you learn that this is a trigger, a stimulus, to learn how to react to it. Okay, so let's put this together. So the food leads to salivation, both unconditioned, because that's natural. Then you take this neutral thing, this bell creates no response. Then you put the bell right before the food's coming, and the dog starts to naturally salivate because the food is still there. But when you do this over and over and over and over again, eventually it is learned that the bell means it's time to salivate because the food's probably coming. Now I'm adding that last part, because the food's probably coming. It's like the dog has a sense of cognition, which we'll talk about later. But that bell is a signal to salivate. And so here's the tricky part. Pavlov discovered that even without the food, because this pairing had happened over and over and over again, the dog was naturally responding to the bell. The Pavlov might have not presented food at all, like all day, but the dog was conditioned. The bell means it's time to salivate. Okay. Pavlov took this a little bit further and realized that you could generalize the stimulus. In other words, extend it to other similar things. So stimulus generalization means the tendency to respond to stimuli similar to the conditioned stimulus. So similar to the bell. Pavlov conditioned dogs to salivate to small vibrations on their thigh. So he did the same process by doing like a little, I don't know, vibrating like a tuning fork vibration. You guys probably don't know what that is, but just a little vibration on the thigh. And did the same thing, like vibration, food, salivate, vibration, food, salivate, vibration, food, salivate, till finally the vibration just meant salivation without the food. And then what Pavlov realized is that even going towards the lower leg or maybe on the booty, that the dog learned to salivate. So they generalized that not just that vibration on this one part on their thigh, but if you put that vibration anywhere, that it's time to salivate. In the same way, he used a bell, then he used like a beep, then he used the metronome. He found the same thing, that all these different noises, if they were similar enough to the bell, the dog would still salivate. Stimulus discrimination was the other way around, where the dog or anything learns the ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimulus, a bell, and other stimuli that don't signal the unconditioned stimulus. That one feels like a little bit tricky to say, but it basically means that Pavlov tested this by ringing different tones. And despite what I just said, if they were different enough, the dog eventually learned that's not the food bell. That's like the go outside and play bell, or that bell means nothing. So eventually the dog learned which bell meant food was coming or not. So to go back, generalization means that you can have similar stimuluses that can trigger the same response. And discrimination means the organism can tell the difference between something. So I can tell the difference between my food bell and the go outside bell or a different bell. So the dog did both. Pavlov also learned about extinction of a response. When a UCS, so when the food does not follow a CS, the bell, eventually the salivation, the conditioned response, starts to decrease and at some point goes extinct. So essentially, you learn, bell food, bell food, bell food, bell food, bell food, until the dog is just salivating to the bell. But at some point where you just do bell, 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 at some point the dog's going to stop salivating. Like, hey, listen, how many times are you going to ring that bell and not bring me food? I'm not going to salivate anymore. Okay, so I'm making it sound like it's a choice. It's not. I'm just trying to make it easier to understand. So at some point, if you just keep doing the bell without the food, that conditioning wears off. So at some point when you leave high school, you're going to hear bells in other places and you're not going to be like, oh, it's time to go to recess. Like that, you're going to become unconditioned. That response will fade away, go extinct. Okay, then we still have to be careful of spontaneous recovery. After a rest period, an extinguished CR conditioned response, salivation. So when that salivation goes extinct to the bell, it might spontaneously come back, spontaneously recover. And if the conditioned stimulus, that bell, persists alone, keeps coming, the behavior will eventually become extinct again. So bell food, bell food, bell food, learning to salivate, and now just bell, 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 bell. You know what? I'm not going to salivate anymore. There's no need. Then you do nothing. And then out of the blue, you could ring that bell and boop, the dog is going to salivate. Spontaneous recovery. Out of the blue, the dog is salivating again. But when the food doesn't come and it's just a bell, that behavior will go extinct again. So you learn that the bell means recess. The bell means recess. The bell means recess. The bell means recess. At some point in middle school or high school, probably high school, you learn the bell doesn't mean recess anymore. You might be like, oh, time for recess. And then you realize, nope. Oh, time for recess. Nope. And then you stop. You become an adult and you're not in school anymore. And then you go to parent teacher conferences. And now the bell goes off. And you would be surprised at how many parents get up to leave and then they look around like, should I be listening to that bell? So there's been years since your parents might have been in a school setting. But out of the blue, that bell has a spontaneous recovery of your parents know exactly what to do to get up and switch classes. But then eventually they're going to go back to their normal lives and that bell is going to be something that they just ignore. It goes extinct. Okay. Everything I just told you, these are all of Pavlov's ideas. These are all the things he tested, things he named, things that he created to explain how you can condition someone or something to respond to a neutral stimulus in like a natural way. Okay. But then we have J.B. Watson come back around. He was a little bit later, and he came up with his little Albert experiment. So he was the first one to take Pavlov's conditioning and apply it to humans. Like, okay, great, we can make a dog salivate. How would that look on humans? And so if you're confused so far, still make sure your Pavlov page is all filled out. This one might make a little bit more sense because it's about a human. So Watson and his assistant, I think I have in your notes what her name was. Rosalie Rayner, his assistant, conditioned fear into 11-month-old little Albert. And I'll tell you more about about Watson and Rosalie's story. Again, kind of scandalous. I think I previewed that in the last one. But what they did is they took Pavlov's idea and they rang a gong, a very loud noise. And of course that scared the baby. You can't ring a big bell and expect it not to have an impact on a baby. They were scared. But then he took a white rat and put it in front of the baby, and nothing. So, what this told Watson was that the loud noise was an unconditioned stimulus, a natural trigger of fear. What he also learned, so natural fear, natural loud noise naturally creates fear. Then he presented the rat. This was neutral because the baby had no response. Like the baby doesn't know that rats are weird. It's just like, oh, there's a rat. Okay, neutral. No response because I'm only 11 months old. In fact, I probably think it's kind of cute. So then Watson took that neutral stimulus of the rat and paired it with the gong. And so you put a rat in front of little Albert, and then you rang a loud noise over and over again, and the baby was experiencing fear, natural fear to that loud noise. But now the baby's learning to associate these two things together, and baby Albert learns that the white rat is a conditioned stimulus, that, uh-oh, the rat is here. I'm learning that that means I'm about to be scared. So he learned that the rat was a trigger for learning that fear is right around the corner. Apparently, my notes say to myself, the notes I wrote to myself, is that it only took 7 pairings for acquisition to occur. It only took 7 pairings for that association or acquisition for little Albert to learn that the rat means a loud noise is coming and to be scared. So Watson would strengthen this response by repeating this pairing every 5 days or so to continue to build that fear over and over that the white rat is scary, the white rat is scary, the white rat is scary. So what happened? Well, Albert generalized his fear of the white rat to other furry and fuzzy items to where he was scared of anything white, anything rat looking, anything fuzzy looking. And then poor little Albert, his mother and his father, well, his family, whatever little Albert's situation was, moved away before Watson could uncondition the fear. Most psychologists agree, however, that little Albert likely didn't remain afraid of furry things because of extinction. If Watson did not continue to strengthen the response, did not pair the gong with the rat or the rat with the gong over and over again, if he stopped doing that, eventually that fear would probably just go away over time. And I forgot to mention, I will show you a video of little Albert and of Pavlov's dog that I think will help kind of let this all sink in. So Watson also taught us that counter conditioning could help, that you could use the same process to create that was used to create fear in little Albert to create a sense of calm, that you could replace bad emotional responses to a stimulus with more pleasant or adaptive responses. So more pleasant or like adaptive, meaning like healthier coping skills. This is something that we're going to study again when we do clinical disorders, but this is also called systematic desensitization. Maybe underline it. That's kind of an important word. And it's used for phobias and other anxiety disorders. So like if you're afraid of heights, if you're afraid of snakes, that if you pair those scary things with something peaceful, that you can eventually condition yourself to not be scared of those things. It teaches patients to respond in a relaxed manner to the conditioned stimulus until eventually the conditioned response is extinct. So instead of saying, I'm conditioned to be afraid of heights, and then like have heights and then have fear, maybe I pair a peanut butter cup with being in heights, peanut butter cup being on heights, peanut butter cup being with heights. And eventually, that the heights, I learned to associate the heights with sweetness and yumminess. Okay, totally just made that up. And at some point, I'll give you a better example than that, but that's how it would work. So there was a critique, I kind of mentioned this already, that Pavlov and Watson considered consciousness or the mind not fit for scientific study of psychology. Do you remember why? Because they were, look at my finger, see if you can think of the word, I'll ask you again in class, of a particular perspective of psychology. And they underestimated the importance of cognitive processes and biological constraints upon learning. Really simply put, they ignored the subject's thought process and conditioning. They just thought it worked because it just worked, because that's just how conditioning is. The body just responds to these triggers. No, it really works because the dog anticipated the food coming, or because baby Albert anticipated that the rat meant this loud noise was coming. So they actually had a thought process involved. Which leads me to the final type of conditioning here that we need to, that the final type of classical conditioning. And that is called higher order conditioning. And we're just going to get these notes down and you'll see I gave you a little diagram to make sense of it. But again, we'll watch a video to make more sense of this. But higher order conditioning is when a conditioned stimulus is paired with a neutral stimulus so often that the neutral stimulus becomes like a second natural unconditioned stimulus. Okay. But there really is no natural unconditioned stimulus. This is sometimes called second order conditioning, and it's conditioning to a second neutral thing. Just get that down. You're like, wow, you said neutral in the word stimulus a lot. Yes, I did. The picture is everything. If you take an electric can opener and pair it with food, this is classical conditioning right here. Normal first order classical conditioning. Can opener, food, the cat comes running. The cat learns that the can opener means food's coming. But maybe you keep that electric can opener in a cabinet. And pretty soon the second order is squeaky cabinet to can opener, squeaky cabinet to can opener, squeaky cabinet to can opener. Eventually that cat learns that if they hear that squeaky door, it means that the can opener is coming and the food is coming. So it's going to run to this squeaky cabinet door. So this top row, you can even put this in your notes, is the first level or first order of conditioning. And then you could do it again to another neutral stimulus, another second neutral thing that really the squeaky door should not trigger any sort of natural response. But eventually the cat learns this series of events to come running to the squeaky door because it means that the can opener is going to come out, which means my food is coming. I will continue to give you more examples of all of this stuff. Stick with me. Use a lot of replacement words. So like stimulus meaning trigger, response meaning like behavior or action, unconditioned means natural, conditioned means learned. Work on all of those things. And yes, we're going to have those abbreviations, but eventually, as we keep practicing this, which we're going to, it will get easier, I promise. All right, that's it.